So the other day I was, perusing the internet, kind of checking on some tools and stuff that I'd been thinking about getting for a while, and I kept thinking about these little arbor presses. Now I've got a 20-ton, hydraulic press that gets the job done for, most everything I need. However, it definitely has some shortcomings. The biggest being how big it is. You don't have a lot of control over precision work, when you're working the hydraulics. There's a little bit of disconnect from how much fuel you got when you're pressing stuff. And that really comes apparent, for me anyways, when you're doing U-joints. You have to remove the caps, and you've got your needle bearings inside there. And if one of those little needle bearings, falls to the side whenever you're trying to get everything aligned and put back together, well, before you know it, you're trying to push stuff, press them back into the ears, and you either snap one in half or jam it in there and gouge up the bearing surface, and next thing you know, you're going to the parts store getting a brand new U-joint. Again. I mean, the only thing worse than buying new parts is having to buy them twice. So I kind of want an arbor press, just for that reason. Doing U-joints, you've got some precision work to do. Now believe me, I'm generally always a fan of anything you can do with a hammer. And yes, U-joints are definitely possible to do with a hammer. Done it many times. But again, we get back to the reliability and, some finesse of putting together U-joints. Especially if you're going to, spring for the spicers. Good quality stuff. Pay a little bit more, but they're worth it. And you can totally use a vise, too, to press in U-joint caps. Only problem there is you're fighting gravity. So when you want to put spacers and sockets and stack everything up, that doesn't work out very well. So the arbor presses. I mean, to get one that's at least 2 tons, you're looking at almost a couple $100 at least, maybe more. And, man, I'm getting heartburn just looking at those prices. I see that and I figure I'm just going to stick with the vise. If only you could have the vise on its side. And here we are back at the benefits of hoarding. I picked this vise up a long time ago at one of the auctions. I believe I paid $20 for it. Now it's an old school American made vise, the good stuff. And it's your standard bench mount. It's not the fancy swivel. I got one of those too. But this thing's just kind of been sitting back in storage, not really knowing what to do with it. And that's where this thing is going to become the new vertical vise. We're going to flip this thing up on its side, okay? So you've got your flat work surface. Maybe put a couple of arbors or, plates in here to kind of make a little press base with a hollow spot in the center for, pushing out pins. And voila, we're going to have our own janky arbor press. So there's sort of the proof of concept, for having a flat working surface. Now granted, I'm kind of envisioning this new vertical vise as being primarily a U-joint press and, for something you need for light work on a press. But it may come in handy as, an assistant vise to your normal vise here. Sometimes it'll help having a vertical clamping surface that you can bend stuff differently or, hit it with the cut-off saw. The possibilities are endless. Now there's one slight snag to trying to make a vise sit the wrong way. You're going to have a pretty sturdy mount to hold that thing and, hold up to you wrenching on it and, cranking the lever over and stuff. And that's where we come to more scrap. I picked up a bunch of these, I don't know what they are. Possibly table legs, but they're some, I'm assuming, heavy wall square tubing with these plates on the end. The bottom ones are really thick. They're like, 3/4 or 1 inch thick plate. And, the price was right. Cheaper than you could buy the steel stock for, so I got a bunch of them laying around. And we're going to somehow figure out a mounting system where we can have the vise, sitting vertically like that, and a couple of, supports coming down for a tripod, so this thing will be pretty sturdy. My post vise is a combination of an anvil mounting frame onto a diesel Ford 4000 flywheel, which is just a huge chunk of solid steel that I had no use for, and it's doing a good job holding the vise down. So here's the basic layout. You're going to have your main support tower there where the vise is going to mount to. And then you've got these two shorter pieces here. We kind of eyeballed them up to a perfect triangle, and we're going to have the two front feet like that to support the vise from pulling over, and we're going to notch the bottoms and tilt those over, chop off the tops, contour them with a V, and then weld them onto that upper support. And those pre-drilled holes in the feet there will be perfect if we want to drill and tap the concrete and rigidly mount this thing to the floor. And I'm sure everything's going to come out perfect the first cut, no grinding needed. So we got bits and pieces coming together, and we didn't quite follow the measure once, cut twice. Well, yeah, actually we did. So we thought we needed a 45-degree angle. We really needed a 30, and we're going to call that a drainage notch on the bottom of these feet. A little bit of trimming required there, but it's all good. I gotta say that this little bandsaw has definitely been an overachiever. I mean, I've really cut more stuff on here than I should have, and thus far it's still going. And now we're trying to fit up the bottom bolt pattern of the vise onto our setup here. I got a couple pieces of leftover scrap that we're going to weld onto the side. Of course, this weld's kind of screwing us over, so we'll have to figure an arrangement. Something like that ought to do. Well, maybe we're giving this old vise a little too much credit. There's a nice little sand pocket that was cast into the sliding portion. Wish I could find some markings on here to kind of figure it out. It looks like it kind of says 40 right there, which makes sense because it's a 4-inch wide jaw. If anybody out there recognizes what brand vise this is, let me know. So there's the base. It's going to bolt to the bottom, well, side now of the vise. The stand's all tacked up, about ready for final welding. It's like it was meant to be. The rest of this project is due for the tombstone. Well, things are starting to come together now. We've got it mocked up here. Still got a little bit more welding to do back here. But that is basically what it's going to look like. We tried to find a nice, comfortable level here. It's not too high or too low when you can hold the drive shaft, when you're pressing the caps on. And we had the mounting base here. We welded it onto that. Basically, I tried to get center mass of the vise right in the center of the 3 feet. And since we had some extra stock and an extra plate, I had this little kicker come out back here. It's basically in line with the back foot. So if you mount this up against a wall or a beam, you can actually bolt it up to it and have it really sturdy. Now we're going to say that this was skill, and that the handle is going to clear that beam here just by an inch or two. Yeah, that was by design. We'll have to get some better quality grade 2 bolts from the hardware store. Now as it sits just on the floor, you can put a pretty fair amount of torque on this thing with just gravity assist hold down, but definitely some concrete anchors would be best. Or just throw the handle in the center and use 2 hands to keep it from tipping over. So I mainly built this, for U-joints. That was kind of the purpose of having a arbor press, and this evolved into a vertical vise, and now I'm trying to think of all the other options and uses that this could be helpful for. I mean, I'm hoping that this comes in a nice addition to your traditional vise. I mean, where you clamp everything that way. Having another option to do it in a different orientation might be one of them tools you never knew you needed until you have it. That almost looks like a hippopotamus. There we go, ready for work. Getting put to use already. Well, today we're going to talk about a little bit of advice for a good vise. Not that vise. Now I know I'm not some professional blacksmith or whatever that, uses this to make a living. But you spend a lot of free time out in your shop. And you know what? Having a good sidekick like this can make a big difference. I mean, I guess I can understand if you're just trying to buy a vise, you know, for the just very basic use and you don't plan on needing it very long. But this is one of those investments that could potentially be very long term. And like, if you can invest in something good, something that especially has character and some history behind it, I mean, I'm all for that. Now, this is another one of those items that you never really fully appreciate until you have a good one. And I've heard people compare these things to it's like having a third hand, you know? I mean, you always need something to hold something, clamp something, compress something. The uses are endless. And a good quality vise can give you years, if not decades, of service. Now, sometimes you can get out there and score some pretty good deals on good domestically made vices, you know, at yard sales or flea markets or auctions. But, you know, I would consider, you know, maybe up to 40, 50 bucks. You can generally always find something pretty decent for that much that's a good size, you know, maybe, you know, 4-inch vise or so. And it might not be new, but I bet you it'll still outlast, you know, some of that foreign made junk that's floating around out there. Now, granted, just because it's old doesn't necessarily mean that it's good, okay? This vise here in particular, I picked it up at the flea market a while back. You know, they wanted 10 bucks for it. I haggled them down to $8, and it's a USA made Red Arrow. Pretty cool little 3-inch vise, you know. It's a little bit more beat up now that I've been using it for a while. However, you know, it's all cast. It doesn't have any, you know, replaceable jaw face plates here. And as you can see, it's kind of taking a beating. But it's held up pretty good in my opinion. And for 8 bucks, been well worth it to me. Now this vise, it's an old Dunlop. And this is actually a hand-me-down that was originally my grandfather's. And you can see it's been used over the years. Now, you know, it's kind of been relegated to this stump for years because I didn't have a good workbench. So I just put it on an old oak stump here, or, you know, firewood log that I stole. And it's been on here for many years. And, you know, I don't think a import-made vise would have held up like this. Now, this vise here was a relatively new, you know, addition to the shop. It's a post vise. And from what I've been able to gather, it's made by Columbia. Now this is considered a 5-inch, I guess. And it's kind of hard to read. But if you look carefully, it actually says 1915 on there. Now I made up the base that it's sitting on. Well, bits and pieces of it. The main frame there was actually an old anvil base that I got at the swap meet. And that bottom part is the flywheel off my tractor that weighs like 100 pounds. It's like a solid 3 inches thick worth of steel. Couldn't use it because I had to switch it over to a different one, you know, and it was just sitting out there in a pile. So what a great way to recycle that. A couple pieces of scrap angle for reinforcement, and we got a piece of rail there welded on the top as a makeshift mini anvil. Now, it may not be the most professional setup, but you know what? It gets the job done. And every time you use it, you sometimes think about, you know, you're using a piece of equipment that's over 100 years old. It's definitely got some history behind it. Makes you wonder what previous owners put those dents and dings in there. And you wonder how long this thing will keep on going, you know. Now, it was missing the return spring and the frogger. So we had to improvise on this one and, you know, add in an old Polaris clutch spring into there as the return to keep it open. And as you can see from that number there, this was an auction score. I paid an entire $12.50 for that. So I might be in the minority, you know, about wanting a bunch of antique shop equipment out here, but I know there's other people out there that appreciate this kind of stuff, and it's always cool to see old items like this that normally would have been discarded and cast away, you know, still in service. So my recommendation is, you know, if you've got the chance or the opportunity to go out and pick up an old, you know, vise like this, or heck, any old piece of equipment or tooling, you know, that you can make use of and, you know, keep going. If you appreciate that type of stuff, it's really worthwhile to spend even the same amount of money as new versus old, you know, to keep a little piece of history alive and going.